good morning, good afternoon, good night, everyone. Welcome back to Let's Figure This Out, the show where you can learn about complex ideas in a chill, simple way. But first, let's start off with our first segment, which is called I Talk to You About Life, or maybe if I have any updates, I'll talk about that. And it could be just like life updates or channel updates or anything. I don't know. Um, but yeah, I only really have one update right now, which is the name of the show. So last episode, I wasn't really sure what I was gonna call this series, um, but I ended up deciding on let's figure this out because that's what we're doing, right? We're trying to figure this out, trying to figure out life or just anything. And yeah, I'm just figuring this out and I want to share it with the world. So that's what we're calling it. But yeah, that's pretty much the only update, I guess. So, anyways, let's get into the topic of today, which is Socrates or Socrates. It's Socrates, but there's a clip from the Bill and Ted movie where they travel in time and they meet Socrates and they keep calling him Socrates. I thought that was pretty funny.
Socrates, the only true wisdom consists in knowing that you know nothing. That's us, dude. Oh, yeah.
Um, but yeah, why did I choose Socrates for today's episode? You might ask. And why are you asking? Why are you questioning me? Like that's kind of rude. But yeah, I decided to talk about Socrates because I feel like ancient Greece is very famous. When you think of philosophy, if you haven't been exposed to a lot of modern philosophy, then you might be thinking of ancient Greece. And I thought that would be a good start for this series. And they're old. They're not the oldest philosophers. Obviously, there's a lot that are older than Socrates, but um, I don't know. I felt like this would be a good start, and we can talk about other ones in a future episode. But yeah, there are okay. So three of the most famous philosophers, I would say, are probably Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and all three of them are from ancient Greece. And that's also that's also another reason why this is probably a good start for a show like this. It's because all three of them are from ancient Greece, and also Socrates is considered like the father of modern philosophy or whatever. And on top of that, um, Plato was a student of Socrates, and then Aristotle was a student of Plato. So that's a good, like, we learn about Socrates, and then he taught Plato. We can make an episode about Plato. And then Plato taught Aristotle, and we can make an episode about Aristotle too. I feel like that's a good, like, three, like, episodes that we could do, like, one after the other. Just because they all, like, you know, they're Socrates taught Plato and Plato taught Aristotle. So before we start, I do have to throw out a disclaimer out there. Socrates never wrote anything down. So around the time that Socrates was alive, there was kind of a weird stigma about writing. Just a little bit. It was like, because people back then loved memorizing stuff, and writing is kind of like if you write things down, then you don't have to memorize anything. And it was weird. Some people didn't want to write. They thought that it would be better if they just memorized everything. And so, since Socrates didn't write anything down, everything that we know about him is from other people. And you can even go further than that. Like, I've heard some people question if Socrates was even real, but we think that he is. We think that he was real, at least. We're not sure if everything that we know about him is true, but we know that he was probably real. Kind of like how, like Jesus, like everything we know about Jesus is from his disciples. Like they're the ones that wrote everything, not him. But we do know that he was probably a real person. Yeah, that's kind of like what happened to Socrates. Like it's all from other people's perspective, so that's something to keep in mind. Um, I guess we can start off with his life, and then we'll get into his philosophies. So Socrates was born in Athens, and it's estimated that he was probably born around 460 BCE. Well, in the 460s or 470s, that's like the estimate. And then there was a trial in which he ended up being executed, and that's estimated to be around 399 BCE. The year 399 BCE. So he lived for about 70-ish years, 60s or 70s, somewhere around that. Um, and yeah, he was described as really fucking ugly. That's so funny. Like, it's funny how multiple people wrote about how he looked, and they were not very uh, nice about it. Uh, people described him as he apparently his eyes were pointed and they were like bulging out, and they were pointed in different directions. And also, the people claim that he didn't care about how he looked. Like, he didn't care about how he was dressed, or about his hair, or his hygiene, and things like that. We don't know if that's true, but there's multiple accounts of that kind of description. And he was described as really fucking annoying. Like, he would just go around Athens. He would just talk to people and like question everything. He was, I guess you could make the analogy of like he's like those annoying little kids that are like, why? And then you give them an answer and they're like, but why? But why? Kind of like that's kind of how he was described, which is kind of funny. Oh, something I found that I didn't know about before doing some research for this episode. I don't think a lot of people talk about it, but he was a hoplite, which in ancient Greece It was like a type of soldier. It's like a heavily armored infantry type of soldier. So that's pretty cool. He fought for Athens, and at the time they were fighting against Sparta. And apparently he saved the lives of a couple like famous people, like some famous general and people like that. It's crazy. If that's true, then that's insane. But yeah, anyways, so he lived for about 70-ish years, and then he was so annoying that they executed him. That's like pretty much how it went. It's not just that he was annoying, but he was questioning things, and at the time, that's like a very dangerous thing to do. Um, because he was like questioning the government, questioning um, politicians, and like all these like rich like nobles. He made some controversial arguments, I guess, and they ended up the the Athenian government ended up um, accusing him of corrupting the youth, and so they went to trial. And apparently, people say that he would have been smart enough to get out of it, because at the time the way that trials worked was through basically debating. So it doesn't matter you know if you were guilty or innocent, as long as you were good at debating, I guess. Whoever wins the debate wins the trial, I guess. Which I think is kind of dumb, but that's how they did it back then. And what's weird is that Socrates he was famous for being really good at arguing. He was really good at debating and stuff like that. But for some reason, as far as we know, he wasn't really trying, even though he was like sentenced to death, basically. He didn't really try to get out of it. He just went in there and started insulting everyone, being annoying. And yeah, he was sentenced to drink poison. And that's what happened. That's how his life ended. But throughout his life, he did make a lot of contributions to the history of human thought, and even to this day, he's been influential this entire time. Like, there's people today that are still learning from him, that are expanding on his ideas, and it's crazy because it's like 2,400 years after his death, we are still talking about him and learning about him, learning from him. Um, and yeah, that is pretty insane to think about. So, what kind of stuff did he contribute to? Uh, like I said before, he was just described as someone who questioned everything and everyone, and that kind of developed into what we now call the Socratic method. The Socratic method is basically just questioning everything, questioning or refuting everything. So basically, what he would do would be like he would ask a question, and like a very simple question or a question that you don't really think about very deeply, and then you would give him an answer, and he would just either keep questioning why you gave that answer, or he would just tell you that you're wrong. Uh, and he was really good at it. But yeah, basically the Socratic method, he would just question everything and everyone, challenge every idea that you could come up with. And at the time, that was really bad. That was you should not do that when you're living in a time where you can probably get killed just for questioning government officials. And he did that. That is what happened to him. But yeah, another important thing that he questioned or criticized was blind faith in the gods. And obviously, in ancient Greece, the gods were very important. It was like it would have been pretty bad to talk shit about the gods. That's like something that they really cared about. So that just kind of shows how determined he was in questioning and challenging things that people didn't normally question. Another concept that is attributed to Socrates is what we call Socratic ignorance. I don't know why there's a name for it because it's not that deep. Basically, what that is he talked about how he's aware of his lack of knowledge, and that's like pretty much it. Like, I don't know why we needed a name for it because like it's not that deep. But there's a story where the Oracle of Delphi, which was kind of like a religious figure, like she was supposed to be connected to the gods. I think specifically Apollo. I could be wrong, but I think it was Apollo. And people would go to her to ask questions and stuff like that. And apparently, one time, a friend of Socrates went to the Oracle of Delphi and he asked her, "Who is the wisest man?" or something like that. And she basically told him that Socrates is the wisest person in the world. So he went. His Socrates' friend went back to Socrates and he was like, "Hey, I just talked to the oracle and she said that you're the wisest person." And so Socrates is like, "No, I'm not. The fuck." And so he goes to like all the wisest people in Athens and he starts asking them questions. And at one point he realized that they were very arrogant about how much knowledge they had or something. It's like they pretended like they knew more than they actually did. And so Socrates ends up being like, you know what? I actually am smarter than them because they think that they know everything. And at least I know that I don't know everything. At least I admit that there's things that I don't know. And that's like the whole thing. I mean, it's interesting to think about, but it's not really like a complex idea. I don't know why they had a name for it. But yeah, people just like making things more complicated than they should be. Um, the third kind of philosophical concept that we're going to talk about is what he called eudaimonia. So eudaimonia, there's some uh, vagueness to it. Like there's no direct translation that is like objectively the translation, if that makes sense. But a lot of people call it flourishing. like flourishing or like excelling or something like that. Living your best life. Live, love, laughing. That's basically what Socrates was talking about when he talks about eudaimonia is like human flourishing. And he argues that a person can only flourish with virtue and knowledge. Now, this one is, I disagree with this one, but Socrates claims that virtue and knowledge are the same thing because he thought that people who do bad things don't know that they're doing bad things, and that if only you knew what the right thing to do was, then you would do it. I'm a little skeptical about that one, Socrates. But yeah, that was his argument for why he thinks that virtue and knowledge are the same thing. He's like, if you know what the right thing to do is, then that's the thing that you're gonna do. Probably not, but yeah. He has a lot of quotes or like accounts of him really caring about human flourishing, about eudaimonia. Um, and to him, it was all about knowledge, and it was all about pursuing that knowledge, and that was what he thought would cause people to flourish. There's a really famous quote from Socrates. Well, it was written by Plato, but Plato claims that Socrates said this. And the quote is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And what he means by that is uh, examining your life is like thinking about it, questioning it, challenging it, and all the ideas and beliefs that come with it. Um, he really believed that in order to flourish, you have to constantly question everything. And that is the way that you can pursue knowledge, you can pursue virtue, and ultimately flourish. Whether you agree with that or not, I think it's a very um, it kind of commands some degree of respect that he's not just telling you what to believe or like he's not telling you how to live your life. In a way, he just thinks that um, he doesn't want you to just take beliefs and preconceptions for granted. Like you you need to question those things and kind of like examine your life, and if you do that, then you are more likely to flourish and live a virtuous life. Uh, he said that everyone should be a philosopher, that he thought everyone would benefit from philosophy, and I do agree with that. Um, we can talk about that in a little bit, but yeah, he said if you don't think about these things, if you don't think about your life and all of the things that you never question, then that life is not worth living. It's a strong statement for sure, but That's interesting to think about. Now, why was Socrates so influential? Well, like I said earlier, Socrates taught Plato, and Plato taught Aristotle, and the three of them are considered to be like the three most influential philosophers in history, basically. And at the very least, if you don't think they're the most influential in history, then at least they kind of kicked off a lot of ideas, a lot of schools of thought, and we like philosophy as we know it today would not exist without them. So that is part of why they were so influential. Another reason why they were so influential is because of the way that philosophers in ancient Greece um, developed schools of thought. And by schools of thought, I mean like Stoicism, Cynicism, and that kind of stuff. And the way that it worked was usually you would have someone famous or someone who is considered to be like one of the best thinkers or whatever. That person would start a school of thought, and then he would teach all these people, and then the best ones or the most famous ones would go off and start their own school of thought. And so the reason why Socrates was so influential was because a bunch of his students created their own schools of thought based on what they learned from him. The most famous one being Plato. Plato started his own school, and same thing happened with him. A bunch of his students created their own schools based on what they learned from Plato. And then one of Plato's students was Aristotle. Same thing. And so a lot of schools of thought, or a lot of the famous philosophical ideas that we know of today, they all started this way. And a lot of the most famous schools of thought came from that kind of tree of Plato taught all these people taught all these other people. Um, so Socrates is basically the one that we attribute this all of these schools of thought to, just because all these people learned from Aristotle. Aristotle learned from Plato. Plato learned from Socrates, and all that stuff. So you could say that Socrates was the reason why all of these schools of thought even exist. And even to this day, like throughout all of history, people have been influenced by his ideas, by the things that he was teaching, and even today, like people are still learning from him. Um, we still learn about him in school and anything. Um, and philosophers are still trying to build on his ideas to this day. So hopefully now you have a pretty good idea of who Socrates was and how he influenced the history of human thought and how he continues to influence philosophy to this day. The three main philosophical concepts that we talked about today were the Socratic method, which is questioning everything, Socratic ignorance, which is acknowledging that there are things that we don't know, acknowledging that we don't know everything, and eudaimonia, which is human flourishing, which, according to Socrates, the only way for you to flourish and live a good, virtuous life is through knowledge and through the pursuit of that knowledge. Now, let's move on to the last segment, which is called Do I Have Anything Planned for next episode, or am I making any changes to the content that I'm gonna be making, or do I have anything else to talk about? And the answer to that is no. I'm just kidding. Uh, okay, let's talk content first. So, in terms of content, uh, I plan on I'm gonna keep making episodes about philosophy. Um, Part of that is just because I'm really interested in philosophy and I enjoy learning about it and talking about it. But also, I think that everyone can benefit from philosophy, regardless of who you are. Like, it doesn't matter if you're like your age or your gender, your race, your anything. Like, none of that matters. I feel like regardless of who you are, philosophy can teach you a lot. You can benefit a lot from philosophy. And I'm not just talking about, you know, oh, this philosopher said this, so that's what I need to do. No, like everything is something that you can think about, even if you don't agree with it. It's just it's important to think about life, about your values, your beliefs. Even Socrates, to Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. So, um, yeah, I think that's very important, especially in today's economic and political environment that we're living in right now. Um, it's important to think for yourself. But yeah, I would say like regardless of where you are in the spectrum, I think humans are conditioned to kind of agree with what other people say. If if all of your family and all of your friends support one specific group of people, then you are more likely to agree with that. Same thing with religion. If your entire family and all of your friends are part of a religion, then you're more likely to also be part of that religion. And sometimes I just kind of do it because that's how we grow up. Like I've been exposed to this specific set of ideas my whole life. And so it's easy to just keep going, but I think it's important to question those things. And philosophy is really good at asking questions. So I think that's a big part of why I think everyone could benefit from it. But, anyways, that's what I think about content. That's why I want to keep making episodes about philosophy. And for the next episode, it's pretty much guaranteed that I'm going to do it, is an episode about Plato. Because Plato was a student of Socrates, and also a lot of what we know about Socrates was written by Plato. So I think it would make a lot of sense to do next episode about Plato. But yeah, let me know what you think of that, or if you have any other suggestions. As much I want to take as much feedback as I possibly can, because I want to get better at this. It also helps to know what people would be interested in, or what people think I can do better. That's gonna do it for today's episode. I hope you learned something today. And as always, thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time so we can figure this out.